Welcome, everyone. You are listening to Get Out of Your Own Way with me, April Yee, on Transformation Talk Radio. Get out of your way and get what you want through transformative self-care. I'm here to support you in getting out of your own way. So what does getting in your own way look like? Well, how about letting other people define your value and worth, ignoring your body by not taking care of yourself, and people-pleasing? These are just a few ways I've gotten in my own way. In this show, I'll share new perspectives on self-care practices so you can discover options and choices for expanding what's possible for you and your life. In each episode, I have questions for you, and when you take the time to answer them, they'll help in building up your belief about yourself. I believe that when we get good with ourselves, we get good with our lives and the world. Get Out of Your Own Way starts now. Hi, everyone. I'm April Yee, and you are listening to Get Out of Your Own Way on Transformation Talk Radio, episode 12. The concepts I talk about in each episode are things I wish I learned sooner to support myself and get out of my own way. So I hope these ideas are coming to you when you need them. Today, we'll be talking about relationships and how they're affected by our manuals that we have. We'll look at what our relationships are based on, what manuals even are, and what might happen if we're able to drop our manuals. So, what is a manual and how does it impact our relationships? I found these quotes to introduce today's topic a bit, and there are 3 of them. So here's the first one. Blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed. And that was attributed to Alexander Pope. The next quote is, if you expect nothing from somebody, you are never disappointed. And that was from Sylvia Plath from The Bell Jar. And the last one is, when you stop expecting people to be perfect, you can like them for who they are. And that was from Donald Miller, from, I think his book, it's called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, What I Learned While Editing My Life. And so I appreciate the first 2 quotes about disappointment. And I agree that it's true that when we don't have expectations, we stay open to what is, and therefore we might experience less disappointment. And I like the third quote because this gets to a deeper level of how the topic I'm talking about today, manuals and expectations, get in the way of our relationships. So you might already have an idea of what a manual is based on the quotes I shared. A manual is basically an instruction book that we have in our minds for other people and even for ourselves. Manuals include expectations, but also unsaid or unagreed upon rules of behavior. And we might have ideas for how we think people should behave. And when they don't meet these ideas, we think they're doing something wrong. But what if we didn't have these ideas in the first place? What would happen with our relationships then? And let's look at what our relationships really are. What makes a good quote unquote relationship or a quote unquote bad relationship with someone? I talked about this in the previous episode, and I'll reiterate it here now. And you may have never heard this perspective before, and it may seem a little simplistic, but I'll share this with you. Our relationships are based on our thoughts. And many of us are confused about how the world works, especially when it comes to relationships. We are under the impression that we have to control the world and what other people need to, I think that other people need to behave a certain way so that we can feel good. So we think we need to control the world and other people's behaviors in order for ourselves to feel good about our relationships. So we create rules for our relationships, and we build so many rules for our relationships that we've stopped actually experiencing them. And we are instead laser focused on our expectations of how these relationships should be instead. And our relationships are really just our thoughts about another person. And I'll give you an example. I love my friend Tanya, and I always have. She's amazingly fun, gorgeous, smart, funny, and loyal. So, how is it possible that not everyone has these same exact thoughts about her? They are absolutely true to me. And why isn't everyone who knows her in love with her the way that I am? And if we think about it, someone else can know Tanya and have a completely different relationship with her. And why is that? She hasn't changed. It's just that their relationship with her is dependent on their thoughts about her, not dependent on her as a person. Does that make sense? So, our relationships are simply our thoughts about another person. And knowing this is the secret to all relationships. And your relationship with anyone, I'm going to say it again, is dependent on your thoughts about them. And so you might be saying that your thoughts about them are dependent on what they do and how they behave. But what I want to let you know is that isn't really how it works. Your thoughts about them will be dependent on your expectations of them and how well they meet those expectations, which we call their behavior or their actions. And you can't have love for someone. You just feel love when you think about them in loving ways. And someone doesn't make you mad. You have thoughts about that person that make you mad. Someone can't hurt your feelings. You just have thoughts about what that person said or did that hurt. And if you think about this visually, there is you and there is the other person. You don't have a direct experience of the other person with nothing in between you. What's actually in between you is all of your thinking and all of their thinking. So you barely ever get to the actuality of the other person at all. It's just all your thoughts about them and how you think they should be versus actually seeing them for how they are. And part of discovering that we have manuals and what is in those manuals is that we can wade through our thoughts and expectations and try to eliminate most of them so we can actually get to know the person we're in a relationship with. And once you truly understand this, your relationships will have the potential to be so much better in every way. And so I'll say it again, your relationship with anyone is dependent on your thoughts about them. And you might notice that many of your relationships are similar, and this is because many of our thoughts are similar. We tend to recycle relationship thoughts from our lifetime of conditioned programming. And you can test this out for yourself. Think about the person you most love in the world. What is your main thought about them? And what about the person you love the least? What is your thought about them? And so, for example, and I gave this example in the previous episode too, but I'll just share it here in case you haven't listened to the previous episode. If I have a bad relationship with a coworker, it's because of how I'm thinking about them. If I think my coworker is incompetent because of a mistake they made while doing something, then my thought about them is this person is incompetent. And I'll find evidence about other things they do to prove my thought about them correct. Our brain likes being right about things, so it most likely won't see the correct things this person does, and the incorrect things they do will stand out like neon signs to us. And if we're thinking these negative thoughts about our coworker, how do you think we're likely to show up with them? If we think the self-coaching model that I mentioned before, the self-awareness tool, our coworker is the circumstance, and our thoughts about our coworker create our feelings about them. So our feeling based on our thought, this person is incompetent, might be annoyed or frustrated or exasperated. And when we feel any of those feelings, we will likely show up with impatience. We might be condescending towards them, or we might let our frustration or annoyance show. And the result of those actions is that we are not competent in our relationship with our coworker, and we create a strained and tense relationship between us. because my coworker will likely sense my condescension or annoyance and respond towards me accordingly because they're thinking some type of thoughts about me when I act condescending or annoyed towards them. Do you see how that works? And it's all because of my thought this person is incompetent and my brain only wanting to find evidence of that person's incompetence. It affects my relationship with that person because it affects how I choose to show up with them. And if you think about a time when someone has acted condescending or annoyed towards you because of whatever thoughts they were thinking about you, how does that make you want to act towards them? Right? So, how might I change my relationship with this coworker of mine? I would need to think different and better thoughts about them to start. And my other coworker might have different thoughts about this specific coworker and have a totally different relationship with them. And again, it's the thoughts about the person that differ, not that the person is a totally different person with me than with my coworker. And this includes our thoughts about ourselves. So, how we think about ourselves contributes so much to how we care for ourselves. If we don't have great thoughts about ourselves, we will likely not be caring for ourselves in a high caliber way, just like you might not care for someone who you don't have great thoughts about. And I've talked about this before in the 3 pillars of transformative self care and how our thoughts about ourselves impact how we speak to and about ourselves and how we treat ourselves. So, coming back to our manuals, what might be the instructions in our manuals for others and in our manuals for ourselves? So, manual instructions can also be called expectations of others. And I'll give some examples, and you'll notice the word should in all of them. So, when you catch yourself thinking that someone should be doing something, you can clock that as a manual instruction you have. And you can even do that for things that you think you should be doing as well. So here are some examples. You should compliment me more. You should help with the kids more. You should support me in my diet. You should take out the garbage. You should drink less. You should want to have sex more often. You should be home more often. You should work less. You shouldn't look at other women. You should tell me how you feel more often. You should talk to me more. You should be more involved in decisions around the house. You should be in constant contact with me. You should wear more attractive clothes. You should make me happier in our relationship. You should remember my birthday and know what I want without me telling you. You should be more romantic. You should make more money. You should be kinder to my mother. And on the list goes. And before moving on, I'd like to note that when it comes to children or employees, we do have rules for them to follow that are not just expectations. For example, it might be a rule that children tidy their rooms every week or that they help with specific household chores that they're assigned. It's likely a rule for most employees that they arrive to work on time. And if these types of rules aren't followed, there are consequences, and that's appropriate in these types of rules. In social or romantic relationships, we might feel burdened by these types of rules or expectations, especially if they're not mutually agreed upon or even spoken about together. And like I mentioned before, we mostly have these manuals for others so that we can feel good. We think that if others follow our manuals, we will feel good or safe or secure or needed. And if people don't follow our manuals, then we don't feel good or safe or secure or needed. And my life coach is the one who came up with this concept of the manual. She started to see a pattern in her clients' relationships and their levels of satisfaction. And what she noticed is that most of us have these operation manuals for how we want other people to behave. And these manuals are very detailed and precise. And it's like a book of rules and expectations of what is normal or kind or acceptable behavior for someone else in their interactions with us. And Like I mentioned before, often this manual is unspoken, so the other person can't even comply, even if they want to. And relationships can turn into two people just following each other's manuals. And this is the opposite of true connection. This is more like compliance and control at our own expense and at the relationship's expense. And sometimes this can be perpetuated by modern therapy and self help. For example, when a couple goes into couples therapy and the therapist asks them to list their needs that the other person should fulfill, when this type of therapy succeeds, the relationship becomes a list of rules and obligations, basically like a job. And an alternative way to think about this is to decide in a partnership that both people want to take care of their own needs and just enjoy each other's company. And this can make for a very enjoyable marriage, partnership, or relationship. It does require a lot of self responsibility to take care of ourselves. And this doesn't mean that each person can't ask the other person to do things or make requests of them. It just means that they don't need the other person to comply so their needs can be met. So if one person doesn't do something the other thinks they need or want, they can do it for themselves. And it becomes a win win because neither person spends their life doing things they don't want to do. And each of them learns how to meet their own needs and take responsibility for their own emotions. And I know that this might sound counterintuitive and maybe even just unrealistic, but it's because we've learned to rely on other people to meet our needs instead of thinking that we can meet our own needs. And this is sort of related to internal and external validation. Like we are used to seeking other people's approval in order to approve of ourselves. But we can decide that we will approve of ourselves no matter what, even if someone else doesn't. And so this is kind of similar to meeting our own needs. We can decide that we can meet our own needs, even if someone else doesn't. We can still make requests and ask them to, do certain things. And if they don't want to do those things, we can be grateful that they're telling us the truth. And we can also decide like, okay, well, if this thing is really important to me, do I want to be with a person who doesn't want to do this thing? And that is up to us to decide. We can decide to stay, we can decide to leave, but it's about us taking care of ourselves and our own needs in that way. And so knowing that we have manuals and dropping these manuals can be the best first step in any relationship where you might be having friction. And this brings us to consider, how do we drop our manuals then? When we've been so used to having them, as sort of like a way to evaluate or judge another person and how they're behaving. We've probably had manuals our whole lives, and it's because we've been, again, programmed or conditioned to have them based on society, based on what we see in the media. But we can decide what's actually important to us in our relationships. And I want to pause here and just clarify that this is not meant for abusive relationships. So every person has the right to be free from abuse. And if you're experiencing more than just friction in a relationship, there are more serious considerations to make. And having the expectation that you will not be verbally abused or physically abused by someone you're in a relationship with is valid. And if you experience that type of behavior from someone, you can choose to leave or distance yourself from that relationship, no matter who it's with, even if it's with a family member, and even if you need support or help to do so. Okay, so to drop our manuals in order to improve our relationships looks like this. You are an adult. You get to be who you are. I get to decide what I think and feel about it. And if you want a good relationship, you will choose good thoughts and feelings. And I can hear people thinking, but what about if someone cheats on me or yells at me or hits me? And this is where our brain likes to go. And the truth is, like, this is rarely the issue. And these are boundary issues. And I'll talk about this in a minute. But just consider your daily life right now and notice where your manuals are creating issues in your relationships. So you are an adult. You get to be who you are. I get to decide what I think and feel about it. And I could do a whole other episode on boundaries, and I probably will soon. But here's a quick overview. And so let's first be clear about the difference between a boundary and a threat. A boundary is what you will do. A threat is what you want someone else to do. And you can't control another person, even though it's very tempting to think we can. So please stop trying. It'll save you a lot of energy. A boundary is an appropriate action you will take if there's a boundary violation. So if someone is coming into your emotional or physical space in a way that's inappropriate, you need to set a boundary for yourself. A boundary is what you will do if someone violates you. So a boundary is, if you smoke in the car, I will get out. If you hit me, I will call the police. If you yell at me, I will leave. If you touch me inappropriately, I will leave and never come back. And sometimes it's important to inform the person of your boundary, and sometimes it isn't. The boundary is for you to take care of yourself. And usually we experience boundary violations because we haven't taken care of ourselves and protected our boundaries. And we blame the other person, but we're the ones who have created the situation. For example, if my cousin comes over and borrows clothes without asking, I would consider that a boundary violation. But if I don't say anything and she keeps doing it, I'd be upset and resentful and blame her. But it's really on me because I didn't set a boundary from the beginning. I could have said, last time I noticed you borrowed my sweater without asking me. Please ask me before borrowing my clothes when you come over. If you don't, I'll lock my bedroom door when you come over. And so a boundary needs to be set with love and absolutely followed through on, no matter what. And this is what a threat would look like in the previous example with my cousin. You can't go into my bedroom ever again. You're a thief. I hate that you didn't ask me to borrow my clothes. I don't even want to be related to you when you do that. Give me my clothes back now, or I'm never talking to you again. The truth is, my cousin can do whatever she wants because she's an adult. And threats don't allow for that truth, but boundaries do. And if we relate this to a romantic relationship, if someone cheats on you, you really can't control whether that happens or not. However, you get to decide what you want to do if it happens. And you can decide to leave or you can decide to stay. And maybe you didn't have that boundary before it happened, so you decide to stay and set up a new boundary that says, if you cheat on me again, I will leave our relationship. And maybe you did set that boundary before it happened. And that boundary would have been, if you cheat on me, I will leave our relationship. And you get to follow through on that. And if you decide to stay after it happens and after you did set the boundary, you're not taking care of yourself because you're not following through on the boundary. The other person might cheat again, but that's up to them if they know the consequence of their action. So following through on the consequence is up to you, even if it's hard to do. And this is how we take care of ourselves with boundaries. And so when we start to recognize our manuals for others, we might want to pay attention to the manuals we have for ourselves. How might our relationship with ourselves be better if we become aware of the instructions we have for us? And what would happen if we decide to drop some of the manuals we have for us? And so dropping manuals just means becoming aware of what our expectations might be, what our shoulds might be for other people, and deciding, I don't want to have these expectations or shoulds of other people. I just want to let them be who they are and see if I like that person as they are without me kind of like imposing my rules and expectations on them. And so when I do get to see who they are without these rules or expectations, do I like that? And if I don't, I can make a choice. It might be a hard choice to leave that relationship or put distance between us. But if I do like this person without my rules or expectations on them, then that is actually a really great and healthy way to be in relationship with someone, because we are actually liking and appreciating them for who they are without our expectations of who they should be. And so I just want to leave you with that. And I'd love to hear what you think about manuals and what happens when you decide to drop yours. So, my message to you today is that we can get out of our own way by recognizing that we might have manuals for other people and for ourselves that might be creating problems in our relationships. And once we understand that our relationships are built on our thoughts about other people and whether they are following our manuals, we can learn to drop our manuals and meet the person as they are without all our expectations and manuals for them. And when we meet the person as they are, we can decide if we want to maintain our relationship with them or not by letting them be who they are. And we can allow ourselves to be who we are too, without all the manuals that we have for ourselves. We can accept and appreciate ourselves without potentially unrealistic expectations we might have been holding for ourselves. And it's a liberating feeling for ourselves and when we do this for others too. I'm so glad you joined me for this episode of Get Out of Your Own Way. To go even deeper, join me for Self-Care Sundays, monthly drop-in sessions, and you can find out more at thehealingmodalities.com. You can also sign up for my weekly Self-Care Seeds newsletter there. And join me again for Get Out of Your Own Way every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Central, and 3:30 p.m. Pacific. Next time on Get Out of Your Own Way, I'll be talking about two other relationship concepts: unconditional love and lovability. Do you know that love and loving never hurts? Loving is the opposite of hurt. And when we think we can protect ourselves from being hurt by not loving someone who we might want to love, we're just hurting ourselves ahead of time. And when we think our lovability is related to whether someone loves us or not, we're getting it wrong. What if we can have unconditional love for ourselves and also practice it for others? And what if our lovability has nothing to do with how lovable we are, because we are 100% lovable, but more to do with someone else's ability to love us? Until next time, have a great week, and I'll see you soon. You have been Transformative Self-Care with me, April Yee. Tune in every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. In each episode, I present new questions that support you in building up your beliefs about yourself. To connect with me or for more information, you can email me at thehealingmodalities@gmail.com or visit my website, thehealingmodalities.com. See you soon.